My name is Rick Anderson. I grew up in northern Minnesota, and I am a 1988 graduate of what was then Mankato State University. It's now Minnesota State University, Mankato. My degree was in English Lit with a teaching license and a minor with a forte in musical theater. I graduated in '88, and immediately after college, I got a gig with playing Cookie Monster on Sesame Street Live. So that's how I got my equity card, and that got me to New York. I spent a number of years working in New York as a performer or a hooper. In about '93, I moved over to company management, and that took me to my involvement with the musical Rent. You know what? I was an athletic dancer known for doing back handsprings. I was a cheerleader or a stuntman at Mankato State. But at a certain age, you can no longer do those back handsprings. So I also wanted more consistent work, and I found that in company management, which was an easy transition for me. My involvement with Rent goes back starting in 1993. The three main producers of Rent was Jeffrey Sellers, Kevin McCollum, and Alan S. Gordon. They did a smaller tour. Their first producing venture together was a show called The Real Life Brady Bunch with Davy Jones. And we recreated episodes of Brady Bunch, and then they also had the Real Life game show. I was their company manager for that, so I was part of their production team when they only had one or two offices in Times Square. Fast forward to it was 96. I was company managing a show called Party Off Broadway, and that was closing, when I got a call from Kevin McCollum in the box office asking me what I was doing. And I said, well, I planned on working on this other show. Why? He goes, well, we have the show down at New York Theater Workshop. It's called Rent. And we're looking to increase our staff. As ironic as this may seem, I said, well, let me go look at the show first. Like, I had some big input on it. So they got me a ticket for Rent, and it was performing on East 4th Street at the New York Theater Workshop. And I sat down and I watched the show, and it emptied, after the show, it emptied into the East Village, whereas, Rent is set in the East Village. Walking home that night, I decided that, yes, I definitely wanted to be a part of this musical. I let them know the next day, and they hired me on the spot. After the death of Jonathan Larson, Rent had become such a huge human interest story. It was life mimicking art, or art mimicking life, and the ticket demand for that show was through the roof. The New York Theater Workshop only sat 200 people, and they had yet to decide if they're going to bring it to Broadway. So they brought me on board to take care of all the house needs, all the front of house needs, and all the important people that wanted to see it, including Steven Spielberg. Had to squeeze him. I think he sat on actually the stairs. We couldn't get him a seat. And then when we finally did transition it to Broadway, it was sold out for 2 weeks before it even, or 2 years before it even opened. So they had set aside house seats. So I had 88 house seats with the artists, producers, press, Richard Kornberg, Bernie Telsey, and the designers. So if you wanted to see Rent over those first 2 years, you had to go through me. One of the producers, Jeffrey Sellers, joked, apparently, this is his story that he told me, he saw Dr. Paul Hustles while he was adjudicating a regional ACTF, and Paul mentioned my name, and Jeffries told him I jokingly, of course, was the most powerful guy on Broadway at that time because you had to go through me if you wanted a good seat with Rent. I didn't become selfish. They weren't my house seats, is how I looked at it. And if they knew one of the three producers, then I would try to fit them in. Obviously, the producers would tell me these people are going to call, so I would try to secure the house seats for them. Same thing with the actors. They would fill out forms and give them to me, and then you'd always keep an emergency, and you probably know this, of 4 emergency that you would only release the day of, and 2 that you would only release a half hour before. basically, because of the demand was so high, if you didn't know any of this collective group, I would get people call me 2 weeks before, and I'll see if I have any extra. I made a lot of enemies. A lot of people were mad, but I got a lot of great gifts too. Again, I'm going to just rehash the story that Jonathan Larson wrote the book and music and score for Rent. Unfortunately, the night before it was going to open, he died, and he didn't get to see this play come to fruition or see the success. The story I know about Jonathan Larson is when Rent opened in '96 in Nederlander Theater on 41st Street in New York, it had been abandoned, or it had been empty for quite some time. And the rumor has it from his friend is that they broke into the Nederlander in about '93, '94, and they went back at the top of the balcony and sat in that back seat and looked down at his empty canvas and said, "This is why I want to write musical theater, to build this theater up." So it has that parallel with that it later did open up there. Okay. It actually started as a workshop with a lot of the same people that went on to do it at the New York Theater Workshop and Broadway. And it started there. They've got a grant, I think the Stephen Sondheim Scholarship, to further this along, or it might have been the Hammerstein. To further this along. This is what I do know. I wasn't involved in the very first workshop, but I do know that they kind of tamed it down. For example, when Mimi is about to sing Out Tonight, they had her actually shooting up heroin. And in the workshop, they changed that to, I guess, gloss over it or make it a little bit more acceptable to the audience. But they did keep, if you see, Daphne Rubin Vega used to wear gloves that went all the way up here. And the thought behind that was to hide her track marks. And I also know that they toned down the lyrics in Take Me or Leave Me. And it's nothing that I probably want to repeat, but it mentioned gonorrhea and a vulgar term for a female part. Okay. So that was all kind of censored down to make it maybe a little bit more acceptable and not as shocking to the audience. Well, I have to say this, and I think it's important for your audience to know that when I left Rent, I thought it had a couple good numbers. I didn't really fall in love or get the full story and all the lyrics until probably the third time, and then you're hooked. So my advice to anyone seeing Rent is listen to the cast recording, because it was or has been or usually is directed as a rock concert, where the music sometimes would out-drown the singers, which if you're a purist, you know, it's lyrics first. This wasn't. The age range at the first, and always is. I mean, of course it's youth orientated. I think it spoke to that generation. But of course then you had all the hipsters and all the Upper East Side people coming down to the East Village to see this show that was getting this huge buzz. Not only regionally, but nationally and internationally. Okay. And people thought it was loud at first, but they did recognize that it was groundbreaking. And that's what I joke with my friends now, because I'm so old now that the show that I originated with in New York is now having a revival. It's at the New World Stages, and it's only been closed for 3 years. I think the final performance at Nederlander was 2007 or 2008. So it's only been 3 years, but there's been such a high demand for the show. And of course now it's gaining a lot of regional productions, including Mankato State. So a lot of Minnesota State University. So it's getting a lot of press and people. It's a whole new audience that's coming in. My job, I've worked in the office during the day, and then I took care of front of house, all the retail for the show when it first opened on Broadway. So I would go from the producing office, and I would walk the 3 blocks to Rent. Now, Rent traditionally has rush seats. and I think they're one of the first people who did it. They offered the first 2 rows of the theater for $20. Now these are seats that now go for $200. So that would give this energy at the show, because it would be a rock star. It would be like what they call it, a mosh pit on the first 2 rows. So obviously I had to be at the theater at 6, so I had to literally step over camp and this line that went across the front of the theater and around the block, hoping that they would be the lucky 20 to get the seats for that performance. And then making comparison to Deadheads, I said, oh, they're Rent-heads. And that seemed to have stuck. And so I can say, I coined the phrase Rent-heads. Okay. It's not a big stretch. I've read the review. He hasn't reconceived it. It's basically, but it came from the 90s when it first came out, and now it's a period piece. Now I would say it's a period piece because there's been so much advances in HIV management and all the issues that they address in Rent. So it's definitely a period piece. Does it still talk about, the rebel and No Day But Today? I still think those themes run true for a whole new generation. This is what I'll say about Rent. First of all, that listen to the cast recording before you see the show. You'll enjoy it so much more. It was a once-in-a-lifetime thing for me. I remember opening night. This is important, I think. Opening night, I'll never forget this. It was sold out. It was invited audience only. And the cast walks out on stage to about a 5-minute standing ovation. And of course, there is Jonathan's parents, Al and Nan, and his sister Julie there, center orchestra. And then everyone sits down, and then Anthony Rapp, before he delivers his first line, he's the person that plays Mark, says, we dedicate this performance and every performance to the memory and genius of Jonathan Larson, which the whole audience stood up again. They had another 5-minute applause. So that's always what I say to all the performances that are coming out now, all the regional and colleges that are doing it. I always remind them that this guy had a dream to change and revolutionize musical theater. And I think that's important, that his spirit flows through.